Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today we're going to be talking about the easiest to hardest top laners to learn. Some of these top laners have some really interesting mechanics which they can pull off, but overall their general kits are fairly easy to play. So that's mainly what we're going to be looking at. So for example, Aatrox is a pretty difficult champion to learn. You're not just going to pick him up in the first couple of games. You've got to be able to learn his Q placements, his Ws, his hidden almost hidden mechanics with your E auto reset kind of thing, and stuff like that within your kit make Aatrox really strong. So Aatrox is probably an A tier difficulty champion to learn. I'm going to go from E being the easiest, S to being the hardest. Akali is probably going to be around A tier as well. Akali has a lot of things she can do with her kit. She's pretty difficult to play because of those reasons, and her damage is very much spread across her kit now. A lot of it is tied into E2, but for the most part it is a case of you have to land most of your abilities to kill someone rather than just landing Qs or just landing R2, something like that. Akshan is a very hard champion to learn. He is the lane bully, the ranged lane bully for people who want to invest time into a specific one kind of thing. Unlike Quinn, who is significantly easier to play than him. Like, Quinn is probably around C tier. Quinn doesn't have a lot of mechanics you can pull off. If you're going over for Prowler's Claw build, I guess you can pull off an additional mechanic, but that's more talking about specific builds, whereas Quinn on her own is a lot of kiting and being able to just space correctly from your opponent. Plus blocking your vitals with your marks, so... But that's about the mechanical depth of Quinn. But I guess because of the kiting, she doesn't fall in the lower tiers. Camille is also a pretty hard champion to learn. Camille on a surface level is just Q1 into Q2 Cho'Gath, but that's not really the case. Q2 isn't really Cho'Gath anymore. It's more like empowered Rengar Q. Only very late game does it get anywhere close to, but Camille has a lot of mechanics. Her E is really important to be able to avoid CC, engage, get the stun off. Her R is really important to separate someone from a team fight, get picks, and avoid CC as well. Can be quite vital. Her W, really important that you hit the W2 part. It does increase damage and healing. So there's a lot of things you have to be aware of on this champion. Plus the overall spacing and blocking of both Qs. Pretty important. Cho'Gath is a fairly easy champion to learn. He does have, well, 3 skill shots with his E, W, and Q all being skill shots, but they're all AoE and they're not particularly difficult to hit. If you land Q1, you can use Q, then you can usually W and E and land both of those as well quite comfortably. Same goes for W. If someone's silenced, you can land your Q because they have no escape tools. But overall, Cho'Gath is around D tier, maybe C tier. He's easier than a decent amount of chumps to play with. Cassiopeia is probably B tier. She has a lot of her kit is very revolving around her E and being able to kite people. You've got to be able to land with good Rs, make sure people are facing you rather than if they're trying to switch between facing and turning away. You've got to be able to land that facing one. But a lot of it just comes down to kiting, Q landing, and just E. And follow them. A lot of this will be my opinions on the champion as well. It's kind of everyone will learn how to play champions at a different rate. Some people may pick up Cassie really quickly because they've played other champions of the same class, or they're used to kiting and stuff like this. But if you're going from a very if you're going from someone who just plays most champs and just learns champs as they go along kind of thing, I'd say Cassie wasn't particularly difficult to learn. But you do have to take a lot of time to play Cassie. And I probably learned Cassie in about 20 games, I'd say. To play her well enough to say, I can actually play this champion. Darius is pretty hard to play. Yeah, Darius can be brain dead and just run people down level 1, level 2, however you kind of want to play this champion. But you've got to be able to land your Qs, you've got to be able to position correctly in the team fights. A lot of Darius' skill comes from being able to play these team fights. If you're not good at playing team fights, you can be turbo fed on Darius and just lose the game. I've had that where I felt like I was being really impactful and then just couldn't play the team fights. I'd say the skill expression probably comes from playing the team fights and being able to land these big ults within it. Mundo is a very easy champion to play. He's even easier after the changes. They've just pushed more power into his base kit. You don't need to play on his R so much. He's getting hotfix nerfed in his next patch, which I'll cover tomorrow when the full list of changes comes out. Ravenous, Jack Show, more jungle, and Mundo are being nerfed. I don't think there's any other top laners being nerfed, but we shall see. Yeah, because Fiora once again has parried the nerf list. Fiora is a very difficult champion to learn. You can learn Fiora to a very surface level with just blocking Ryters with Q and getting your grass procs, but if you want to win in the all-ins, win in the team fights, win in the side lane pushes, you've got to learn quite a lot about the champion, and for that she is very, very difficult to play. Maybe A tier, but to play her to an excellent level, you have to, yeah, it would take time. Gangplank is definitely A tier. Being able to learn your barrels is an entirely unique skill. If you're bad at Gangplank, you'll lose your barrel timings quite a bit. If you're good at Gangplank, you'll be able to learn your triple combos and proc from over the enemy laner significantly more than they can get them off you. Quite important. So yeah, Gangplank SA, probably A for the moment. Garen is probably an E tier. Garen's pretty easy to learn. There's a chance he's D tier because there are quite a few top laners which you can just smash your head into the keyboard and win at the moment. I guess Garen does kind of follow that. Not a lot of skill expression on this champion. He will very much either run at you and kill you, or run away and sustain back up, taking like a good trade or something, or just die. He's a very stat-stick champion. Stridebreaker does make him pretty strong though. He can kill most ADCs one item, even if they have 2 or 3, because he's tanky and he can just run them down super easily. Nah is probably on A tier. You got to be able to learn your rage mechanic. It's a new mechanic for him. You got to be able to learn kiting well. You've got to be able to land your skill shots. Big ults in team fights are pretty important. It can make a Nara in a team fight look either useless or really impactful. So that's you got to make sure you hit that. The champion's pretty difficult to play as well. So I'd put him around A tier. Gragas. If you're going with a tank build, the E spam W grass pork. So like tank Gragas build. It's probably on B tier. If you're going with more AP heavy, you've got to be able to land your Qs, land your Rs, land Rs into Qs. That's one of the more difficult Gragas combos to learn. Once you learn that, you can get some really nice damage down onto people and just execute people. Gragas I'd say is probably on B A. I'll put him in B. Graves is easy if you're just playing him as a stat-stick laner, where you just queue through waves, auto the wave, and run up, well, back off, not really trading with your opponent that much. If you're trading more with the opponent and you're spacing correctly, using your E's to be impactful, then he's probably on B tier. Graves isn't an easy champion to play. Like, you have to put time into playing Graves to get him well. It's why Graves performs really well at high elos, but then really struggles in low elos, because people don't understand the champion as well. But yeah, if you want to put Graves in, you've got to put decent amount of games in. Gwen used to be a lot harder than she is now. Gwen in her current state is probably around B tier. Being able to land your empowered, your 4-stack Qs, hitting your Rs, getting your Ws down when you need to be invulnerable, taking the right trades is all very important as Gwen. If you're behind on this champion, it could be quite hard to play. She's a very feast or famine champ, kind of like Aatrox. Except I'd say she's probably slightly easy to play on Aatrox. Around B, A tier. Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger you can play to a really low level with your just Qs, turret spam. The support Heimerdinger kind of wants to play like that. Lane Heimerdinger, you've got to be able to correctly take those 1v2s. Being able to 1v2 on Heimerdinger is a really big part of his kit. If you can land your E and empowered W, or empowered Q if that's what you're kind of going for. To take those 1v2s on the top lane. You can quite easily do them. So being able to learn when you can, when you can't, turret placement, what empowered ability to use where, stuff like this is all really important on Heimerdinger. Alawi is also pretty hard to play. Being the main part is tentacle placement. being able to get those correct tentacles to do the most optimal amount of damage, being able to figure out how many points in Q, or if you need to run DMAT to push the wave correctly. Stuff like this, depending on your playstyle, can be really important on Alawi. Getting those big R's off, building correctly, Iceborne, Triforce, Divine Cinder, you have a lot of options. Alawi is probably on AB too. My job goes down actually, because I consider these champions hard to play in Groves. Aurelia is a very hard champion to play. Most good Aurelia players are Aurelia OTPs. There's a reason why this champion is usually the champ I say, which is the most... this champ can be D tier or SS tier depending on the pilot of the champion. If you're bad at Aurelia, this champ can look useless. You can do nothing all game. You will just be bullied by enemy top. It doesn't matter who it is. You usually just get bullied by most of these champs if you can't play the champ. If you're good at a champ, you'll beat most of these champs. So, except for maybe Malphite. Malphite is just not good for Aurelia if you're playing Malphite correctly into the matchup. But yeah, Aurelia, really hard champion to play. Being able to manage your wave correctly to get your Q stacks into your level 1 cheeses, stuff like this. Knowing you have to know most of your matchups to play Aurelia. Jax is a lot of auto weaving and taking good trades. Jax will get harder with his ultra change because it's going from a very basic generic ult of just stats to an actual active ability. So he'll probably fall around here. Probably A tier. A lot of it is just auto weaving and trading correctly on Jax. Maybe B tier. Jace is A S tier, probably high A. Jace is pretty hard to get down. You've got to be able to know your damage correctly to get those all-in combos with your landing E empowered Q in ranged form into melee form. That's really important because in melee form your damage is limited by not having range. So being able to make sure you can execute people in your QE auto W field on melee form is quite important. It makes trading on Jace a big part of how you play Jace. Getting the damage down, landing your EQ, stuff like this. Karma, pretty easy champion to play. You've just got to be able to Q, land your Qs and just Q spam on waves, clear waves, and then be an E-bot, Q-bot, sustain bot, depending on how you're playing Karma in the top lane. Karma's around B, C. It's a lot of just making sure you can land your Qs. Kayle, probably on C tier. Kayle isn't a particularly hard champion to play. It's very much a battle of surviving laning phase and being able to make sure you can take the farm without losing too much of your health, because your health is your resource during the laning phase. It's how you can keep playing. If you lose it too quickly, TP back and then lose it too quickly again, you are going to really struggle in the game. Just making sure that you're taking the right fights on Kayle is a big part of playing Kayle. Kennen. A lot of it comes down to his QWE trades, and then finding the right flank angles and right engages with R. That is a big part of playing Kennen. Just being a lane bully and then a team fight menace if you can find the correct positioning. Kled. Kled is very high damage at the moment. He will quite comfortably bully most meta top laners. So landing Kled would be pretty good. Ravenous is being nerfed, but Kled himself is I'd say it's a pretty difficult champion to play. But being able to remount without losing too much of your health so you don't die during the remount process is quite important. Being able to take correct trades, because if you trade incorrectly too many times, you will lose your advantage during laning phase, and that can make it really hard to come back into the game. Another part of Kled is being able to make sure you get the right ult angles. You want to make sure you're hitting someone towards the end of the duration to get the maximized damage and shield out of it. I wouldn't say it's too difficult, but there are definitely mechanics there. W mechanic also being one, making sure you're getting the full use out of that. K'Sante. K'Sante's a pretty hard champion to play, but a lot of it comes down to being a lane bully with your QE auto trades and just nailing that on the head. Once you've done that, a lot of it comes down to just making sure you do enough damage in your R to execute somebody. He's he's pretty early game skewed, but I think they are looking to push him towards the more late game, being a more late game champ over time. The most recent buff suggests that with the health regen and health growth going up. Yeah, he's probably an A tier champ. Lilia's probably on B tier. Lilia, maybe C tier actually. Lilia's not too difficult to play. You have to play Lilia into the correct matchups where it's mostly just going to be tanks which you're playing her into. Your Cho'Gaths, your Scions, those who can't land skill shots on her particularly easily because of her movement speed. That is where a lot of her strength comes from. So probably C tier for Lilia. Being able to just move correctly and land your Qs and Ws is a really important part of her playstyle. Big ults during team fights. 5-man speaker sleep, 9-man speaker sleep. Malphite is a pretty one-dimensional champion to play. A lot of Malphite's strength comes down to maxing the right ability first. Your W maxes, your Q maxes. A couple points in E, possibly, depending on what lane you're going into. Grasp, Arcane Comet, possibly full AP, if it's a good full AP Malphite game. That is where most of his strength comes from. Past that, he is pretty linear in the way he plays. It's a lot of Q spam and making sure that you're not draining yourself on mana before you can get your mana flow stacked up, and then resetting, picking up your tier, having mana flow fully stacked, and then just being able to continuously harass during laning phase. Maokai, D tier, because there are mechanics with his E, which you've got to nail. His E is a really, really good form of vision. It cannot be stated enough how free Maokai E is as an anti-jungle gank mechanic. Sometimes you just can't be ganked because of Maokai, because it's a Maokai in the top lane. But when the E is slowing for 50% and you can't get to him in time before he can retreat, if he's overextending, of course, and not playing the lane correctly, then it can be hard to punish a Maokai. Then it can be easy to punish Maokai. But Maokai, a lot of it comes down to trading correctly. His early game is definitely weaker than it used to be. He struggles through lack of sustain and his passive being on a long cooldown early. But late game team fights, he is a menace. You can control the map with Demonics and E. When you have a lot of health stacked up, if you're going your heart still, the E slows for so much. It can make sieging objectives really hard for the enemy team. There is a possibility he's C tier, but I'll leave him D tier because he is also just a tank, a Q spam tank. Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser is harder to play than these three, but as long as you're landing your EQs, getting your passive procs, you can run most people down. Jaxo being nerfed will hurt him. He'll probably just go Riftmaker. Shadow roaming the correct target in late game and making sure you're not hitting the QSS target. it is pretty important. Nasus, you've got to have a good understanding of when to go in. If you're going in as Nasus and like throwing your laning phase because you don't have the damage to and you're playing your laning phase badly, Nasus can actually be really hard to play. But once you've learned this, so I wouldn't say he's E tier because you need to have a bit of understanding of how you want to play Nasus. Like these weaker early game champs won't fall into the E tier because you can't just brute force your way through laning phases easily. Once Nasus 6-6 though, you will beat most champions if you're allowed to free farm and just get your stacks. You have build options as well. You can choose depending on the matchup. Olaf, you got to be able to land your Qs. That is a really important part of playing Olaf. Getting your presence stacked up and hitting your presence stacks with your Qs, making sure you can sustain your mana through the laning phase. You don't really need Triumph on Olaf. If you're going your more tanky spirits sustain build, then it'd probably be better to take it, but Presence is a really nice rune on Olaf because it allows him to continuously harass during laning phase, which is his strongest point, definitely. Ornn, pretty easy. Ornn has a lot of mechanics which makes him more of a C tier champ, but you can play Ornn to a fairly standard level. A lot of it comes down to making sure you're getting your brittle procs, not over forcing in laning phase before you know that your R1, R2 brittle W procs can kill someone. But past that, you just play safe under tower. People will overforce into you, get impatient. You can play it onto a fairly easy level. Pantheon. Pantheon is making sure you do not die early, because if you die early, Pantheon just falls off a cliff. You can pick up Dark into Bork, depending on matchup. You can go just straight up Eclipse. Pantheon you got to land your Qs. The Q is a smaller hitbox than it used to be, but you have a lot more range with it, which makes it really valuable as a poke tool. You've got to be able to, a lot of Pantheon strength comes from poking the enemy laner correctly and just harassing them down. Poppy, in her current state in the top lane, her value comes from her W and being able to make dash champs null within it. So making sure you land that correctly is really, really important. Definitely choosing when to cancel your R and hot full charge it to separate team fights is also a really important part of her kit. Taking out carries, stuff like this. But Poppy has a lot of value in her displacement, and a lot of it takes time to learn where you want to throw it. Because I've seen some really bad Poppy players, and you've got to be so there is a lot of learning to do there, making sure you can nail this champion. Well, Necton kind of follows Pantheon in a way, with making sure you're harassing enemy laner and taking the ball-ins at the right time, because he will fall off if you fall behind. Bone plating his worst friend, making sure you pocket with Q before you full engage is really important. Making sure you have to sustain the damage and being able to pull off tower dives is really important on Renekton. Rengar is a really hard champion to learn. Making sure you're playing around your bushes correctly, you have the damage to kill people, choosing the right empowered ability, your sustain from W, all of this is really important, and it makes Rengar really finicky to play and hard to learn. Same goes for Riven, really hard champion to play, getting your Q auto weaves in, landing your EWs, R cancelling so you can get the animation of the R through without losing an ability, losing seconds on an ability kind of thing. Stuff like this, really important on Riven, and making sure you're getting the executes correct so your R4 kills people. Ryze is a pretty hard champion to learn. You can play him as an EQ bot, but if you want to make full use of this champ, you've got to be able to land, get good R's off across the map, get good setup with your EW if you're taking Frostfire? No, Everfrost. Is also really important. A lot of this champ comes down to setup, and then later on you will scale. Go AP because AP is better than tank. Has been for a while. I would not recommend tank. Rumble also falls in the A tier. You've got to be really knowledgeable on his heat mechanic and the amount of damage he's going to do. I think Ryze actually probably belongs in B tier. I think he doesn't really line up in the A tier, but a lot of his comes down to map knowledge, so it's less champ mechanic, more map knowledge. Rumble, however, is a lot of mechanics on the champion, being able to know your heat, get the lane bully going through. Nailing that is really important. Sejuani is probably a high D tier. A lot of Sejuani's power comes from her misleading amount of damage. Your W2 does so much damage, and you've got to make sure you land it. If you're building a lot of health, things like your brittle into R, into second brittle into your epochs, making sure you can shatter people. It's really important. It does a lot of damage combined with your R and your W. You can one-shot people from about half health. And making sure you can land all of that is just super important. Set is a very one-dimensional champion. He is like Garen. He is a stat-stick lane bully. If you're ahead, you will bully out most people. If you're behind, you will really struggle. You won't have the health to land big Ws. You won't have the damage to bully people out of laning phase. And you are, at the end of the day, a meatball of damage. And if you're behind, then that can be really hard to play from. Shen, a lot of his strength comes from being able to take the correct trades, land your Ws, making sure you can mitigate damage onto people, on yourself. The taunt is a really important tool. Being able to land flash E's is really good. R's across the map can change the flow of the game. You don't want to take bad R's, which sometimes the person may die and you might have been able to save them. But if you're giving up your entire lane, sometimes it's just not worth. Singed is a pretty hard champion to learn. It's more of the multiple ways you can play him, which is harder to learn about him, whether you're choosing to proxy a bit, whether you're choosing to just lane with him. Early laning phase Singed can be kind of weak. He's pretty blindable still, but definitely has some vulnerabilities. and having the knowledge not to play too much like a psychopath early is really important. Just making sure you can scale up, get your items, your Rylai's, your Demonics, your Jack shows. It's all really, really crucial towards Cinch. I'd say he's probably around E tier. Scion. Sion's not as brain dead as the E tier champs, but you've got a lot of Scion is just landing your Qs correctly, knowing when is a good time to R to get the follow through, being able to utilize your passive correctly. That is a pretty important part of Scion. You can do a lot of damage with passive. Just being able to Q cancel or get the damage through on Q is a vital part of Scion. It cannot be understated how much power comes from his Q, and then being able to follow up with something like W. Yeah, Scion is very Q dominant at the moment, and it's really important to hit that. Soraka probably falls into the D tier as well. I've put Soraka here because I believe she's a pretty good top laner to play at the moment. She wins into most matchups as a you will just sustain your way through most matchups, and you win the matchup if you go even. Even when slightly behind, you are still kind of winning the matchup because you will scale so much harder into the late game. And because ADCs are strong, you can just keep your ADC alive and they will take over the game. Swain. Swain is a champion you've got to be careful with, because Swain you can play for the most part as a fairly stat-sticky champion, but falling behind on Swain can feel really bad, and just making sure you can stack up your E's, get to your level 9 power spike where you have 4 points in Q, is all very important on Swain. You don't want to take too many 1v2s early because you won't win them. You're very reliant on your R for fights. Making sure your jungler doesn't overextend in river is also really important. And a lot of Swain just comes down to being able to hit your skill shots, land your EWs, land your Qs, stuff like this. Silas is a pretty non-mechanical champion for top lane because you are only really going to be playing him into Malphite. You don't tend to play Silas into anything other than Malphite, and if you're only playing him into Malphite, just being able to Q max and bully him with long range Q poke is kind of all you really need to do. I guess picking the correct R is being able to use Malphite R correctly, but it's all very much a case of just being able to hit your skill shots. Not too much going on past there. Q1, Q2, landing E, going for the all-in, taking his R, and then hopefully having the damage to finish him off. Tahm Kench is probably around E tier actually. Tahm Kench's power just comes from being able to land Qs and then double auto into Q, into R if you can get another couple of autos off. It's really important as Tahm Kench to land your Qs. It is your sustain during laning phase, it is your damage during laning phase. A lot of his power does come from Q, but it's not as gated by Science, who is a charge, compared to his, who is just a skill shot and no charge. Teemo is a response champion. Being able to play this champ correctly is really important. Getting rid of blinds off if you need to Q max, if you need to E max, shroom placement. He plays very differently to a lot of ranged champions because of he has almost like a zoning mechanic with his shrooms. It makes him very valuable in certain situations. But if you're behind on Teemo, it can really hurt him if you're not playing into the correct game. At a point, if your Q isn't providing much value, then you're probably playing Teemo in the wrong spot, or you're an OTP. Zac is a pretty easy champion to play. Not a lot going on with this champion. He is a sustain bot during laning phase. You W up minions, you pick up your blobs, you heal for a ridiculous amount, you run Revitalize because it synergizes well with it so well. A lot of it comes from choosing the right time to engage, getting harass off with your W, queuing someone into your minion creeps, getting more damage through that, and then just learning the all-ins. A lot of it will come down to your late game team fights, how you're playing him there, making sure you're getting in at the right angles, and getting big ults. Trundle. I used to list as probably one of the easiest junglers to play, if not the easiest. He is a very, very one-dimensional champion. He is just... he will look at you and just run you down if he can, or run away if he can't, because there isn't much going on with this champ. If you can ult to drain someone, it makes his all-in stronger, but that's kind of where most of his power comes from. I guess if you're looking at pillar placement and zone control as a really valuable tool on Trundle, he probably goes into the D tier. But that's mainly because of Pillar and not because of the overall fundamentals of a champion. Being able to drain the correct person and smacking someone, there isn't a lot of mechanics to it. And I'm not going to move him up a tier because of Pillar. I don't think Pillar is... I think Pillar is a very valuable ability, but I don't think it changes the overall way you're going to play Trundle. Unless your support, where Pillar becomes a lot more of a standout piece. Tryndamere. Tryndamere, as much as he is just an auto-based champion, you don't want to... you've got, it's a lot more of sustaining through laning phase with your Q and second wind. Being able to choose the right time to being able to choose the right time to use your Fury is a really important skill on Tryndamere. Landing your R's, because people can't do that. I mean, everyone's done it at some point where you should have popped Tryndamere R and you've just forgotten, or you just haven't in time. But yeah, I see it happen way too much, way too many times than it probably should. Tryndamere, it's a lot more of sticking yourself to the target, choosing the right time to all in, split pushing, and I guess you can make the same argument for Trundle, but a lot more of Tryndamere's skill comes from his ability to sustain through laning phase and being able to correctly play the lane, whereas Trundle can just smack his way through the lane. I guess you could argue the same with Trynd, but I think there are separations between the two champions. Udyr is going to see buffs towards his ult next patch, so we'll probably start seeing Udyr top lane again. Udyr top lane is one of the harder tanks to play because you've got to be able to cycle around your abilities correctly, know when to bully out the opponent without forcing yourself out too much mana. Jackshot is being nerfed, and I imagine that is where top lane mythic he is going to go, but there are things you have to be able to get down on Udyr to play him correctly in the top lane. You don't put any points in Q when you're playing top lane Udyr, that is something to avoid. Yorick. Yorick is probably on C tier. Yorick is a pretty easy champion to just pick up, but being able to make sure you play on your maiden split push correctly is a really valuable tool. If you're putting, like, you have to put a decent amount of time into Yorick to get wins out of him, otherwise you're just going to start early on. You'll probably just throw some games by not understanding the overall complexity of the champion, rather than it just being like a Nasus Q on a weaker Nasus Q early kind of thing. Because that is what Yorick Q kind of is. It's like Nasus Q, but it doesn't scale, and it's more sustain and summons ghouls later on. Is it more sustain? Maybe not more sustain, because Nasus technically has her life still tied into it. But Yorick's Q does heal him when he's below 50%, so it can vary. Urgot. Urgot's a pretty easy champion to play. This is my most played top laner. I really enjoy playing Urgot. I'd say a lot of his power comes from being able to WWW auto and then just cycle that through onto turrets, onto champions. It's your best way of maximizing damage, but you don't need to know that to get nail the champion. So for the moment, I will ignore that part of his kit. I guess just making sure that you're avoiding your really bad matchups, ones which rushed your Warden's Mails. Although it's not too common anymore, he does struggle into Warden's Mail rush champions. So yeah, that is a big weakness of his. But he's pretty easy to play. Just making sure you're landing your R's after your combos. So combining it with E when you're casting R is really, really important. Yone. Yone is a pretty hard champion to play. I'll put Yasuo up here as well. I think Yasuo is harder to play than Yone, but overall, I think Yone's power comes from being able to he's very misleading with how much damage he can do. He with lethal fully stacked, he will kill most people early on into the game. There are some he will lose to, and he does struggle into the more ranged, like some of the range matchups in the top lane, the ones which can bully him out early. But once you hit a certain point, like your Zerkers and your first item power spike, he is pretty unstoppable and does a lot of damage. Just being able to land your Qs into your Rs, giving people very limited windows of counterplay, trading correctly with W auto, stuff like this is all really important. Yasuo, however, is a lot more early game skewed. You've got to be able to make sure you land your Rs in the correct spots. you do a lot more damage than Yoon does early. So that's another key factor to add in. Yasuo has to play a lot more melee range, whereas Yoon can use his E to fight from more range. Whereas Yasuo has the tornado, Yasuo ends up finding himself playing more in range of the opponent, whereas Yoon can poke from afar through his E and W, and then engage, all in engage, where he has to start playing like a lot more close. Whereas Yasuo he's a lot of Q poke, but Yasuo wants to be able to E towards people, Q harass, auto, stuff like this, and then get his Q3 ult onto the opponent and do the damage through that, and then hopefully kill people. Yasuo is a very high skill champion. Yoon is a bit less, but Yasuo is definitely up here. Vladimir. Vladimir is pretty hard to play, I'd say. Making sure you have a lot of Vladimir's strength comes from farming correctly on him, and then being able to find the right angles, knowing your damage is very important. When you have Night Harvester, it's less important, but it's still quite important to make sure you have all in potential. Which in argument, Night Harvester is a factor you've got to add into that combo, so it does follow the same kind of path. Vladimir is a pretty hard champion to play. A lot of it does come down to just CSing correctly. Wukong. I'd say Wukong's on C tier. He is an early game bully who is very reliant on being able to E, Q, auto weave, stuff like this onto the enemy opponent. He can really heavily harass them. A lot of Wukong's strength probably comes from a lot of Wukong's strength comes from his ability to mitigate a lot of damage through his W, being able to use that correctly. Being able to fake people out is actually a really high skill, and a lot of people will fall for it. Like, even higher elo players will fall for it when you're using it in the correct spot. If sometimes you just stand still and lane, it can be really misleading. Wukong has this really interesting thing where you can misguide people by just standing still. Whereas, like, a lot of these other lane, or most other champs in the game, you want to be constantly moving, constantly thinking about what you want to do, reaction play, stuff like this. Wukong will just stand still on you, because you want to be able to fake out your opponent. Warwick. Warwick is a champion which is kind of reliant on taking those early trades and just understanding how to sustain through them. It makes him really valuable as a champion, but he's not too hard to learn. It's just making sure you can take those early trades and win them, because if you fall behind on Warwick, it can be really hard to come back. You'll run your barriers and your ignites, or your ghosts, your flash. There's a lot of summoners ways you can run on Warwick, and just making sure you can take from where the valuable stuff like this, and then take trades where you need to is really important on Warwick. Volibear is a pretty easy champion to play. He's probably around here somewhere. Volibear is a lot of autoing through the wave, just doing damage through the wave, making sure you're getting your Q and E on top of someone, then trading on them with W, your PTA procs, stuff like this is really important. Then finding the right dive angles, sustaining with W. It makes him easier than the champs in E tier, but he's still pretty easy to play. Vayne. Vayne is a lot of spacing. I don't think Vayne's B tier difficulty, but yeah, a lot of it comes down to being able to space correctly. You know, I'll put it on B tier. A lot of it comes down to spacing correctly and making sure you're not overextending without vision, and picking her into the right comps is also quite vital, because if you're playing her into something like Renekton, for example, he will go Prowler's Claw and he will just one-shot you on repeat. So avoiding bad matchups and bullying out the ones which you do, things like your Darius, who don't have the tools to get onto you, unless you go Streadbreaker and Swifties and Nimbus and Celerity, then maybe have the tools to get onto you. But if he's kind of forcing that hard onto you, you can maybe abandon lane and swap with someone else, or just avoid him for most of the game. Just farm up, get your items, your Ginsus, your Borks, your shield bow, stuff like this, all really important on Vayne. It makes you do a lot of damage. So this is going to be champion difficulty tier list. I think this is a pretty accurate representation. Some of these champs are really one-dimensional, which doesn't make them bad in high elo. Like, you can play one-dimensional champs in high elo and have success. But if you're playing champions optimally, then and to the best of your ability, then the ones in the top lane, ones in the S tier will usually beat other ones in the E tier quite substantially, unless they're like direct counter picks. But even then, you can work around your problems once you've learned the champion well enough. So thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.